Hello and welcome back to Project 380. In this video I'm going to be fixing a few things and upgrading a few things. So after the last video where I repaired all the fire damage from Silverstone, me and Matty went out for a little road tune and it didn't exactly go to plan. One minute it was boosting and the next minute it wasn't. Without changing any settings in the ECU, the car just done whatever it wanted to. And that's when we found out I had a faulty boost controller. So the old boost controller done whatever it really wanted to. Sometimes it was activating, sometimes it wasn't. And how you tell whether these are working is by looking down the end here. And this little silver thing should be moving. So I poked it with a little pick and noticed it was jamming up a little bit. I don't know whether this was damaged by the heat on track or whether something else happened to it. All I know is it's not working how it should. The other thing that concerned me is I've got a little bit of deposit in one of the ports. That is the exhaust port, and it looks like it may have got a little bit too wet. Maybe we'll open this up and see what's going on inside. In the electromagnet part of it there was a little bit of corrosion, but it still moves. In the actual valve part there was a bit more corrosion and I actually can't get that to move anymore. But the seals inside the valve, they look fine. I think this may have been caused by water instead of heat. So I have since replaced the boost controller. So underneath this nice stainless box is a brand new Mac valve. All plumbed in and working fine. The little breather I did have on the exhaust part of the Mac valve, that's now relocated right down there, with a brass filter on the end, just tucked nicely down in the engine bay. So hopefully no water will get in that. And I've built this stainless box around it just to protect it a little bit from the weather, hopefully trying to prevent water from getting to the valve. Fingers crossed that works. It seems to be doing a pretty good job at the minute. And now it seems to be boosting fine again. So that's the first issue sorted. After I had boost control again, the second problem occurred, and that is the China wastegate, which I managed to get sealed for about a week and a half, and now it seems to be worse again. So I'm going to put the camera down and rip that China wastegate off. Old wastegate and screamer pipe are off now, and to do that I had to take the turbo blanket off, which is doing really well. There's no burn marks, no discoloration, and the springs are still straight. Definitely a good investment. Now the wastegate itself, I know exactly what's wrong with this. This sealing ring here is not making full contact to the valve. You can see the valve seat there, nice and clean where it's been contacting, but round the top, that has been leaking through all the time. The same on the sealing ring, you can see right there where it's been leaking, but the rest it's been sealing. And if we hold it up to some light, you can actually see daylight coming through the valve, if the camera will pick it up. Right there. So even though it's a little leak, it can cause quite a big problem, because essentially the manifold is leaking straight through the wastegate and out the screamer. The turbo is probably going to try work a little bit harder, because this leak could cause boost creep, and that's not a good thing. So I'm going to rip that Funkmotorsports wastegate jacket off, and it's time for a new wastegate. It's safe to say I've learnt my lesson, don't buy cheap car parts. And that's why I've gone for a Turbosmart wastegate. Let's unbox this for a closer look. I've gone for a Turbosmart 45 Hypergate. So in the box we get a key, I'll come on to this in a minute, a link for fitting instructions, a nice sticker, the wastegate itself, all the necessary fittings, a sealing ring, 2 clamps with V-bands. So first off, these V-band clamps. They look a lot more heavy duty than the old ones I was using. The hinge at the bottom of the clamp looks a lot more substantial, and I really like the design where the bolt goes in, as it's got a nice place for the hex to locate, making this a lot easier to do up on the car. Now the wastegate itself. Yes, it may not be pink or purple, but hopefully it does a lot better job. According to their website, this is the highest flowing wastegate you can buy. It does look pretty good. Nice, neat and compact. But there are a couple of differences compared to a tile style wastegate. First off, the ports. These are actually 1/16 MPT, whereas most other wastegates are 1/8 MPT. The actual spring housing is a lot smaller than other wastegates. Let's compare that to the other ones I've got. All three of these are 45mm wastegates. So we've got the original tile wastegate here, the China gate in the middle, which is a tile replica, and the Turbosmart 45 hypergate. And as you can see, the Turbosmart is a lot more compact, giving me a lot more room to play with around the turbo, and I actually think it looks better. It's going to be a little bit hard to see on these two as they're a bit sooted up, but the actual stem on the gate is a lot thicker on the Turbosmart one compared to the tile ones, which hopefully means this won't bend anywhere near as quick and should perform for a lot longer. And again, it's a bit hard to see on camera, but the actual gate body itself, as in here, is quite a bit more girthy, obviously allowing more flow, or a better flow. In this old China gate and in the tile one I had before, I had a 4 psi spring. I'm going to change things up a little bit. In the new Turbosmart one, I have got two 7 psi springs, which makes 14 psi. So in the spring housing up here, there are two springs, an inner one and an outer one, that sits something like this, an inner spring and an outer spring. I'm going to leave this at 14 psi. That's going to help with seat pressure, as in pushing the gate back down, and it will make the boost controller work a little bit less. But to change these springs, you need to compress the whole wastegate and then use the key to unlock this collar, separate the spring housing and change the springs. But like I said, there's 14 psi springs in there. I'm going to leave them well alone and leave it at 14 psi and see how that goes. On the spring housing, there are 4 ports, 2 for the upper part of the diaphragm and 2 for the lower part of the diaphragm. I'm going to run my boost lines to this side, which means I've got to put the blanks in this side. You do get 2 blanks in this kit. One's already installed and the other one's in the bag. So I'm going to get those installed quickly. So that's both the bottom blanking ports installed and the top ports installed. I have used a little bit of liquid PTFE to seal them up, and I've installed the Funkmotorsports wastegate blanket. I think that's looking pretty good. Now to install this on the car. This is going to be a little bit more difficult compared to the old China wastegate, as this one had a 4 psi spring in it and this one's got 14. As when you're installing this sealing ring needs to be compressed in order to get the V-band clamp on. An easy way to do this is to put a bit of vacuum hose on the top port and pull a vacuum with a handheld vacuum pump. So with vacuum on the gate, I am able to squash that valve in, but without a vacuum, I really can't squash that valve in. So if you pull a vacuum, installing this is going to be a lot easier. That's all on there now and looking pretty good. It was still a pain to put on, but these new clamps did make it a lot easier. I've also plumbed it into the boost controller. Because those fittings on that wastegate aren't banjo fittings like the tile one, they are sitting in a weird orientation, so I may have to address that in the future. But we'll see how that goes for now. All I've got to do now is pop the turbo blanket back on, and that's a new boost controller with a cover and a new external wastegate all installed. All installed, now on to the next problem. Now this next problem I've actually known about for quite some time. In fact, ever since the first time I hit boost. And that is the intake temperatures. Every time I hit boost, those temperatures are rising rapidly. And unfortunately into a bit of an unsafe level. So with intake temperatures spiking that high, I've really got to do something about it. It could be caused by the turbo being out of its efficiency range, but more than likely it's actually my intercooler. Which, yes, is a little bit small, but I think even more importantly, I've got no way of directing the airflow through the intercooler. So I have decided to replace this, so it's time to rip this old intercooler out and replace it with a new one with some air ducting. And I have just noticed I've got a little bit of a power steering leak. So that's also another problem I'm going to have to fix. That's the old intercooler off now. It's definitely not the biggest intercooler in the world, and it's pretty skinny. I was fooling myself really to think this small intercooler will do anything on such a big turbo. Time for an upgrade. This old intercooler is 540mm long, 170mm tall, and 54mm thick. Pretty small intercooler. To make the most out of an intercooler, the air that's going into the cooler needs to be slowed down. Slower air could transfer the heat through the cooler more effectively. But to slow the air down, we need the air that's going into the cooler to expand or fill a space, and that comes in the form of a bigger intercooler. So the air can come in, fill the intercooler, dissipate the heat as it's going through the cooler, and then comes to the other side, and the air speeds up again, but hopefully cooler. And that is where this big boy comes into play. So this intercooler is 600 long, 300 high, and 100mm thick. A lot bigger than the old one. As you can see, we've got a lot more room for the air to slow down, hopefully dissipating that heat a lot better, leading to cooler intake temperatures. But there are some drawbacks to having an intercooler this big. One, it is a lot heavier than the old one. Two, I'm changing to 3-inch ports rather than 2.5. And the last thing, the turbo might have to work a little bit harder. I might get a slight PSI drop from the intake to the exit of the intercooler, but I would argue that is safer than having extreme intake temperatures. So let's get installing it. Maybe a quick side-by-side look before I install it. That is noticeably a lot bigger and a lot thicker. The old intercooler used to sit at an angle like this, sitting between this bracket here and the bash bar up here. But now the intercooler is going to sit behind this bash bar, which means I think I've got to remove my horns, and I'm going to have to remake this bracket. So let's get those removed and come up with a plan. The horns and the brackets and a few other bits are removed now, and the intercooler is temporarily in place, and let me tell you, it's pretty big. It's just held up with a trolley jack at the minute. It is slightly lower than I wanted, but it's still higher than the jack up bar and higher than everything else, so I'm not too worried. I did want it sitting at a little bit higher, but I think that's the best I'm going to get. I completely forgot when I was measuring for the intercooler. Down here is an angled bit of the chassis that holds the tow and eye, and I don't really want to cut that away as it's quite structural. I'm not sure whether you can see it right there, but the intercooler is wedged up against it. I also think I'm going to have to modify the charge pipes, as the old intercooler sat forward a little bit more, and now because I'm sitting the new intercooler vertical, the ports for the intercooler are in a slightly different place and at a different angle. So I think these are going to have to be cut down and possibly a couple of bends welded on. So now I've got to come up with a way of securing that intercooler in place. On top of the intercooler there's 2 threaded bosses, one there and one over there. So I think I'm going to make a bar that goes across, attaches to these 2 points, and secured to the chassis somehow. And the same on the bottom, there is one locating tab there, and one over there. Not quite sure what I'm going to do to secure the bottom of the intercooler. I'll work that out in a minute. So this is pretty much the biggest intercooler I could fit in the front of the car. I have had to modify a few bits. I'll show you that when I take the intercooler back out. Well, many hours later, and finally, the intercooler is held in place. So up above the intercooler, I've made this bracket out of stainless pipe with some box section hanging off the back, which is bolted to the intercooler. I've taken the headlights out and I've bolted that bracket through there. I have had to cut down these bonnet pins a little bit to be able to slide this bracket in this way. That is quite a substantial bracket, so I don't think that's going anywhere. And I've made this bracket that goes on the bottom of the intercooler, that goes the length of the intercooler, and bends up and installs where the tow eyes would. This bracket isn't quite finished, I'll add on to this in a minute. But now, with this intercooler not going anywhere, it's time to work out what I'm doing with the charge pipes. As you can see, they don't quite marry up anymore. The intercooler is now 3" and my charge pipes are 2.5. I have got a 90-degree elbow from Mishimoto that goes from 3" to 2.5", but that is quite big. So not only is this going to have to be cut down, but I think the charge pipes are going to have to be cut down as well. Well, that wasn't anywhere near as bad as I thought it was going to be. I ended up cutting a good length off of the 3" side of the elbow and about 4" off of the charge pipe. Luckily, didn't have to put any bends on it. I just changed the orientation of where it went into the turbo and where it went into the throttle body. So both charge pipes are now connected to the new intercooler. I've added this little bracket here to support the charge pipes. That is now part of the bracket that holds the intercooler on. That bracket is securing that charge pipe in place, and in case any of these couplers or the silicons come loose, that charge pipe isn't going to go into my tyre. I've put the steering at max angle and made sure the charge pipes don't interfere with the tyre, so I'm pretty happy with all of that. So with the new bigger intercooler all installed and plumbed up to the engine, that should hopefully be one big problem out of my way. Hopefully now I'll see some reduced intake temperatures, a bit more performance, and most importantly it will be safer for the engine. Now on to the next problem. I'm not sure why, but I didn't even consider this when I was building the car, but I now need to build some ducting for that intercooler to guide the air through the intercooler, making the intercooler more efficient. My old setup really didn't work at all. I had no ducting whatsoever, and because air takes the path of least resistance, more than likely the air was just going around my intercooler. So let's make some ducting and make this intercooler as efficient as possible. So I've got myself a bunch of cardboard so I can make some templates out of this first and then transfer it to some metal. So the plan is to guide as much air as possible through the intercooler. So I think I'm going to block the air off here to stop the air going around here. So I think I'll build some sides that go straight down here, butted right up against the intercooler, and then a flat bottom that meets the bumper, and then maybe something up here to stop the air hitting the intercooler coming straight up and then forward. Time to make some cardboard templates. So I've made a cardboard template and transferred it to some aluminium for the sides. I then also made the bottom to the air ducting. As you can see, this is where the jack-up bar goes. Now I'm going to tack weld on those side panels to the bottom panel and make sure it fits. Well, that's the sides tacked onto the bottom, and then hopefully that'll sit nicely up there. Just like that. So now I know the bottom and the sides fit well, it's time to concentrate on the top part, and that's going to be a little bit complicated. So I'll pick this up when it's all done. Well, this took me a lot longer than I'd care to admit. As you can see, it got pretty complicated up the top here. I'll show you how this works properly when it's on the car. All I've got to do now is make some brackets to hold this onto the car. I've made 2 brackets to hold it up, and 2 brackets to hold it securely in place, tight up against the intercooler. Time to fit the air ducting and see what it looks like. So I've got a little bit of fine tuning to do, but you get the gist of how this works. This is designed to force all the air I can through the intercooler. These fins at the side match up with the hole in the bumper. It's buttered neatly up against the intercooler, so the air can't bypass it and go underneath. And the complicated bit up here is to try and make the most of the intercooler. My intercooler actually ends up here, and this whole section here of the intercooler is blocked off by this part. The top part of the air ducting starts here with a nice little curve, hopefully guiding all that air up into the top part of this air ducting with a nice angle at the top, which hopefully that will create a lot of airflow to the top of the intercooler and to the top of my radiator. So hopefully no air can escape around the intercooler or radiator, and all the airflow will be going directly through this. Now all I've got to do is see whether the bumper fits. That fits pretty good. You can really see how now I'm utilising the whole front hole of this bumper. Any air that enters this hole is going straight through the intercooler. not lost out to the sides, not lost out to the bottom, and anything that goes up should hopefully go to the top of the intercooler and through the radiator. Now I'm not going to leave this bare aluminium. I think this deserves a lick of paint. So off it comes again. So while the paint on the air ducting is drying, it's time to solve another problem, but this problem was created by the intercooler and the air ducting. My two fancy pink horns used to sit right here, but now there's an intercooler in the way, so they can't sit there anymore. I couldn't really find anywhere for them to go on show, which is a bit of a shame because I actually imported these from the US, and the only reason I bought them is because they were pink. But I've hidden them away down here, and the other one is on the other side. At least they're out of harm's way and shouldn't get damaged behind the bar. I did have to extend the wiring for them a little bit, but that wasn't too much bother. The other problem that I created is underneath this bar here is some underglow, which lit up the front nicely. But now the bottom of the air ducting is right in the way and it's not going to glow on the floor anymore, but it will light up the whole of the air ducting. So I think I might keep that underglow there, but in the near future I'll get another light bar and put it underneath here, maybe on the bottom of the air ducting. So with that out of the way, I think it's time to put the headlights back in, the new painted air ducting in, and the bumper back on. Headlights in, time for the ducting. That's the ducting all back on now. I've painted it in satin black for a couple of reasons. One, I didn't want it to stand out too much, I wanted it to blend in. And the intercooler's satin black, so I think they merge really nice together. And two, this is going to be peppered by stones. I'm going to get the occasional stone chip in it, and satin black is really easy to just touch up. I've also added some edging to it, so when I'm working on the car I'm not going to cut my head open on a sharp edge. This will also cushion it up against the front bumper, just to stop any rattles, and I think it really completes the look. Everyone loves a bit of edging. Now it's finally time to put the bumper back on. With the bumper back on and it painted in black, I think that looks really smart. I can't actually get down there to see it properly as the wall is really close. That has really transformed the look of the front end. It looks a little bit more aggressive, and it's actually made me want to make air ducting for the power steering cooler and the oil cooler, as this looks a lot more professional than what I had before. Now the other coolers look like they're just slung in there. But I think the intercooler ducting is missing one small thing, and that is a Project 380 sticker. That looks right at home there. Now I think it's time to get the car on the floor and make sure everything's working. That is all sounding good so far. Most importantly, no wastegate leak. So I think I'll let that come up to temperature and just double check everything. So far, successful. No leak from the charge pipes, the intercooler or the new wastegate, so I'm feeling pretty hopeful. Now with a new wastegate with a different spring rate, a new boost controller and an intercooler a lot bigger, it's time for yet another tune. So I can't really see whether all of this has fixed my issues until I've got Matty with me and we're out on the road. Hopefully I'll see more controlled boost and lower intake temperatures, resulting in a more powerful, more efficient and safer engine. So that's all for this video. Everything I've installed today is in the description down below. As per usual, don't forget to like, comment, share and subscribe if you're new, and I'll see you in the next one.